Good morning. Oh no, I was in autopilot. I'm really sorry. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the North Dorset Hustings. This is the only one? No, there's another one coming. Gillingham's coming up, but we are the first. Are we the first? Right. Welcome to the first North Dorset Hustings. Thank you very much for coming out. My name's Chris. I'm the vicar here. It's great to have you, and it's great to be here. Just a couple of notices before we kick off the proceedings. So if there should be a fire, then can I encourage you to leave rather than stay in the building? And then the exits are to the double doors on the right and the left. They are open, so please do make your way through, or out through the doors you came in through. If you require the facilities at any time, please do avail yourself of them. They are through the double doors on my right, your left. And if you make your way to the back and then just go round, that's the best way to go. For you to know, we are recording tonight's proceedings by video, and they will be published on the church YouTube channel in the next few days. So if anyone you know hasn't been able to attend but would like to see the proceedings, they will be able to watch in due course. There are 5 candidates represented tonight. We have invited all 8 candidates standing. So we invited UKIP, Social Democrat Party and Reform. They were unable to attend, unfortunately. So just so you're aware, all candidates for the parliamentary seat were invited. Now, we've got some ground rules. So if I can just highlight, this is a church. This has been a place of Christian worship for over 1,000 years. And so we want to treat it as a place of Christian worship. We want to treat people with respect. So please, I've already said to the candidates, we don't want the candidates to interrupt each other when they're speaking. I also would request that we don't interrupt the candidates from the floor when they are speaking as well. Please show them a modicum of respect. Respect what people have to say, even if you might disagree with what they're saying. We want a country where open, constructive political dialogue is the norm. And therefore, we need to be able to hear each other out, even if we fundamentally disagree. There will be people on this stage who I fundamentally disagree with, but I want to treat them with respect. So please do so. We would like to invite questions through the chair. Now, I know many of you will have had a chance already to submit a question. My colleague Will is sifting through them as we speak, and he will come and bring them down. We've also had some questions submitted already online, and so we will sift through those. What we're going to try and do is aggregate them together so they come in kind of topic areas. So defence or foreign policy or health and social care. So we kind of have a rough journey through the evening. And then lastly, just some of the characters on this stage you will know. Please, no personal attacks. We want this to be about policy. We want this to be about good government. We want this to be about our community. And so please, can I ask you just to refrain from attacking any individual personally. So we're going to start with just a quick introduction of the candidates standing. They will have a chance to talk about who they are, where they come from, the ethos of their party, because every party has a different ethos and different fundamental understanding of what should be fought for. And then I've already told the candidates I was going to throw them a kind of a curveball question in this first 2-minute section for each of them. And the curveball question is, can you tell us a random fact about yourself that not many people know? Does that make sense? Can you tell us a random fact about yourself that not many people know? So without much ado, I'm just going to open in prayer. Because as I say, this has been a place of worship for over 1,000 years. So loving Father, we thank you that you love dialogue and you love difference. You love it when we talk about what really matters. And we pray that tonight we would get to the heart of what really matters for our community, for our nation, and for the world. Help us to respect each other, to dialogue well, and to move forward together. Amen. Amen. So, the other thing I should say is, this is the first time I've done this, so be gentle. Okay? So we're going to just allow each candidate to stand up, say who they are, where they're from, what the fundamental ethos of their party is, and then a random fact about themselves that no one else will know. I'll start with Ken over here because he's sitting on the far side.
Are you doing that all in one go?
Yeah.
I'm not going to split it up. Okay. Hello. Oh. Magic touch. Is that working for now? Okay, great. So I'm representing the Green Party. You probably all know the Green Party from some memory somewhere back in the past, or I knew them as sort of long-haired hippies way back in the day wearing sandals. As you can probably tell, I've lost the long hair and the sandals. I've still got a bit of the beard left. The Green Party, since I joined it in 2015, has grown. It's grown from being people who are basically about the environment and the need for us to pay attention to that, to recognize that we are all part of the environment, we depend upon it. It's grown now into being much more of a political force, realizing that you can't just bang on about the environment, you actually have to get involved in the political process as well. So that's the Green Party that it's grown since the time I joined it, which is 2015. Now, hands up, I stand before you a sinner. Once upon a time, I used to vote Conservative. I'm also a sinner because I was once a mining engineer. So I've actually done my share of pollution and all the rest of it that goes with mining. The end of my career was with British Coal, National Coal Board when I joined it, so that gives you an idea of how old I am. So where am I at? Well, I'm at this because I should be retired, as you can tell, looking at me. I should not be having to do this, but I feel I do because the environment is just not getting the attention it deserves. That's why I'm here tonight. Okay, and I'll be hoping to impress some of you with some of the reasons why you might like to think about voting for other people. Fact about myself, I was born in Africa. I once rode a rhinoceros. Now, when my grandson got to see the photograph, his only comment was, "What was the rhino called?" So that was the impression I made there. Thank you very much indeed.
Is this on? Okay, fantastic. Okay, well, this is obviously my first time, so again, please do be gentle in relation to this. I am an independent candidate. I'm standing as myself against, obviously, the larger parties. It's basically for myself to be able to be your voice in Westminster, rather than having the political parties and the tyrannies of majority and similarity continually basically being played out, and for us not to be able to have our own voices in relation to the policies that are being put forwards. In relation to a fact about myself, back in 2006, I sustained quite a significant brain injury. And that led to 3 years of personal rehabilitation whilst within the armed forces as a Royal Marine. So I've recovered from the adverse effects of a stutter. So obviously for me to be able to speak in front of you today, it's actually quite an achievement for myself. And yeah, as I say, I want to be here and be an independent candidate in Westminster for yourself and your voices, and to make sure that they're heard. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Gary Jackson, and I'm here tonight representing the Liberal Democrats. You betcha. The Liberal Democrats are a party that stands for a number of different values, but foremost amongst them is the value of the individual. It is about the individual and their rights and their freedoms. The second thing is about equality. So it's a very strong component of liberal democracy is the idea of equality. We stand for communities, and we pride ourselves on the connection that we have in our communities, and that a lot of our policies are based on ground-up policies and listening to people and developing ideas that are appropriate for their communities. We also stand for, without going through the whole list, of internationalism. So no surprise that internationalism has featured very largely in the recent past, the Liberal Democrats, through the EU and our attachment to the international aspects of that and cooperation between countries. The history of the Liberal Democrats, it's a fusion of the old Social Democratic Party and the Liberal Party. And before that, way back, it goes back to Gladstone, Lloyd George, and the Whigs. So that's the long history of the Liberal Democrats. For me, I am standing for the first time as a Liberal Democrat and as any elected representative. And I'm doing so because I feel very strongly about our values and about their relevance to the situation that we find ourselves in. So the fact about me, not many people know about that. My wife is in the front here as well, so I won't labour an embarrassing fact. I once was a crewman on a rowing boat, but that rowing boat was a Greek trireme. And it was in the Greek Navy. And one day we were rowing this vessel with 150 rowers on board. And the captain of the ship was a Greek captain and decided he would water ski behind it. So I have rowed a water skiing Commodore in a Greek trireme. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you everyone for coming out this evening. My name's James Coldwell and I'm very proud to be Labour's candidate for North Dorset. And Gary mentioned the importance to the Liberal Democrats of the individual and individualism. Well, I think the single sentence which sums up what the Labour Party is about is a sentence that's contained on our Labour membership cards. And that sentence is that we believe that by the strength of our collective endeavour, we achieve more than we achieve alone. And for me, that ethos has underpinned all of the great achievements of previous Labour governments. Labour established the National Health Service and introduced the welfare state. Labour introduced the Open University and the national parks. And recently, in the Blair and Brown governments, we introduced Sure Start, which was transformative for young people, for children, and for their mothers in many cases. And it's an absolute travesty, in my view, what's happened to Sure Start over the last 14 years. But that single sentence, I think, sums up, for me, what the Labour Party is about. By the strength of our collective endeavour, we achieve more than we achieve alone. And now, an interesting fact, or at least an anecdote. You can decide whether it's interesting or not. My sort of political hinterland, I suppose. I was elected as a councillor for 6 years. I was first elected as a Labour councillor when I lived in London in 2016. And on one campaign session for my council by-election, we had a very special guest who arrived, and that special guest was Ed Miliband. And sometimes when you get these big, high-profile MPs, you send them to what you think will be friendly receptions on the doorstep. And so we sent Ed Miliband to not only a Labour voter, but a Labour Party member. And the interesting thing about this Labour Party member was that his name was David Cameron. And a little while later, Ed Miliband came back and he said, well, he's not the most friendly Labour Party member I've ever met. And I'm sorry to say that a few months after meeting Ed Miliband, David Cameron resigned his Labour Party membership, but happily I still won the council by-election. But thanks very much, everyone, and looking forward to a good discussion this evening.
Good evening, Chris. Thank you so much for bringing us all together this evening. I'm Simon Hoare. I'm your Conservative candidate. It's been my honour and privilege to serve all of the communities of North Dorset since I was first elected in 2015, and I very much hope to be able to do so after the general election next month. But that's up to you. My party is the oldest political party in the world, and therefore what it stands for can change. We've never had a little red book or a little yellow book. We're a pragmatic party. We believe in individual freedom and responsibility. We believe in a state that is servant, not master. We believe in providing platforms of opportunity which are blind to colour, sexual orientation, where you come from in the country, your educational background, or whatever. In shorthand, a meritocratic party with no glass ceilings. We believe in the power of the individual to change their communities, but we also believe in the power of communities to shape the nation. We believe in conservation. We believe very clearly that we conserve our planet, that we are only leaseholders of it, not freeholders. Very importantly, I think that we trust the people. We trust the people to take the right decision, and we always try to govern in the national interest. The fact, now again, like others have said, whether it is of any interest or not, I will leave to you. But when I was a very small child, I had the most terrible speech impediments, to the extent that I could almost not speak. I still pause on R's, TH's, and W's. And it made me incredibly shy, which is a very strange thing for a job for somebody like me to be doing now, where part of the bread and butter of the job is to stand up and speak and advocate. As a result of huge involvement from the NHS, my speech impediments were curtailed and trained away, and I thank them for that. You may not believe me when I say this, but the residue of shyness still remains. So whilst it's the first time for Si and others to stand before you, this is always a nerve-wracking experience. And so I echo what Chris said at the start. Please be gentle with all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. We just wanted to give you, if you haven't already availed yourself of this, and some of you may have, just a kind of a 2-minute section of just saying why you particularly are standing and what your particular focus or passions are in motivation through standing. Does that make sense? So let's go the other way around. So sorry, Simon, we're going back to you straight away. But if you'd like to kind of say why you're standing and what your particular motivations and priorities are in standing.
I'll keep it really quick. When I was 15, I got off the school bus and I saw somebody who I thought I recognised. And it was our Member of Parliament. This was in Cardiff in South Wales. He was a guy called Stefan Tuleski. He was a Ukrainian. He had been sold into slavery by the Russians to the Nazis and then back again, had made his way over to South Wales, had become a county councillor, chairman of Cardiff City Football Club, and an MP in that great sort of Falklands landslide that Thatcher had in 1983. And I still don't know, to this day, if this was the best question I ever asked or the worst. I got off the bus and I said, I think you're my Member of Parliament. Is there anything I can do to help? And he said, yes. You can deliver these 30 leaflets on this side of the road. So I did them, and we had a conversation as we went along. By the end of that, he'd found a rather grubby, tattered Conservative Party membership form. I'd found £2.50 in loose change in my trouser pocket. A transaction was done at the end of the road. I'm not quite sure you do it these days. We'd all have to do it online. And I was hooked. And I will tell you what I was hooked by, and it's what has motivated me. It's 14 years as a councillor and 9 years as a member of Parliament. It's not about me. It's not about party. It's about public service. It's about working with individuals and communities to address problems, to try to solve issues, and to make things a little bit better for the individual who needs some help and the communities in which they live. And I, over the last 9 years, have engaged with our town and our parish councils, with our local charities, with schools, with business, with farmers, with the whole range of sectors that make up this wonderful, vibrant place that we are privileged to call home. No member of Parliament can do it by themselves. They do it with the goodwill of individuals and stakeholders whom they serve. I am not Westminster's voice in North Dorset. I have been North Dorset's voice in Westminster. And that is such a key distinction. I haven't always followed the party line, much to the annoyance of my chief whip occasionally. When my postbag has said, "That's the wrong policy, Simon," I have taken a stand. I've done it because I fundamentally believe in the plain, old-fashioned common sense of most people who live in North Dorset, who I'm privileged to call friends, neighbours and constituents. We all want to try and do our little bit to make our little part of England that we're privileged to represent, or Wales or Scotland or Northern Ireland, a better place than when we found it and when we started. I hope, working alongside those groups, I have helped to make a difference, to break some glass ceilings, to deliver some opportunity, to light the flame of aspiration in our young, to strengthen our businesses, to see investment in infrastructure and our public services. Have I done everything right? Of course not. I'm human. We learn and we move on. That's why I'm standing for public service, to look after you and to continue to do my best.
Well, I first joined the Labour Party in 2010, so I've been a member for a long number of years, and I've been a very active member during that time. And I have to say that in the last 18 months or 2 years, I'm increasingly hearing people say that all politicians are the same, that Labour and Conservative are two sides of the same coin, that voting doesn't really change anything. Well, at this election, that couldn't be further from the truth. At this election, there is a very clear choice. You, as voters, could elect another Conservative government, and that would mean 5 more years of sky-high taxes, 5 more years of declining living standards, 5 more years of ambulances not turning up when they should, 5 more years of crime going unpunished, 5 more years of sewage being discharged into our rivers. Or you could elect a Labour government offering real, lasting change. A vote for Labour is a vote to end the chaos of the last 14 years. It's a vote to repair our degraded public realm, and it is a vote for change. A Labour government will establish GB Energy, a clean, publicly owned energy generation company to cut bills and help us meet our climate commitments. A Labour government would introduce a new deal for working people, a transformative package of workers' rights to tilt the balance of power away from large corporations and towards working people. And a Labour government will deliver the reform that we need to our planning system so that we can deliver the railways, the road upgrades, the homes and the green energy infrastructure that our country so desperately needs. And I'd like you to consider the Labour manifesto not as the limit of what a change of government can deliver, but the starting point. If Labour secures enough votes right across the country, including in this constituency, we will have a mandate to rebuild our country for the long term. Every vote for Labour strengthens the case for real transformative change. So when you come to cast your ballot on the 4th of July, don't just vote against the Conservatives, vote for real change with Labour.
I moved to Shaftesbury in 2011 after, as I just closed in on the end of a 30-year career in the army. And Joanna and I settled in the area. Our children went to school in North Dorset. We live and work here and have thrived here. And that's the first reason that I'm standing, because I believe that I should be giving something back to the community that in a short time has given me so much. I'm a professional engineer, a civil engineer, and after the 30 years of service, I've been working for a company that delivers critical national infrastructure across the UK. Transport, water, energy, and defence. And that also has given me a perspective on the shortfalls in infrastructure and the lack of investment that's happened in all of these areas, and that really will drive, should be driving our growth and our economic benefit. That's not what I'm seeing in North Dorset. My army career, though, gave me the great start that I had in life after uncertain beginnings in Northern Ireland. My progress gave me values, my leadership, my teamwork, but above all, it taught me about the need to serve, to lead. So that's brought me to here. And I have to say that when I look at the way our country is at the moment, I see a situation where we have low growth, we have low productivity, we have high inequality, we lack investment. Our services, our public services are stressed, and we have inadequate housing. For all of those reasons that drive me and motivate me to want to do more for us here in North Dorset and for the country. But we have the most incredible advantages too in this country. We are great at so many things, but many of those, we are not harnessing those positives for ourselves and for the benefit of the country and the wider world. So what I want to do, I want to act now with the community here to develop our wealth across the environment, for our economy, for our particularly focused on our health and social care. And that is really the focus of the Liberal Democrat manifesto, is to address healthcare, social care, to address the economy, and to address the pollution and climate change in our environment. And that's what's motivating me today, and I look forward to your questions during the next session. Thank you.
Firstly, I'm probably actually going to go a bit off script here. I have two speeches that I could probably do. One a bit off the cuff in relation to my life, my experiences, or a bit of a more formal one. It's up to yourselves as the community, really, which one you'd like to hear. So a bit more off the cuff, or yeah, a bit more off the cuff. Okay, that's great. Then I'll put down the more formal one. So my early years and upbringing were carried out in a market town called St Albans. First sort of experiences that I have and knowledge that I have is of my grandparents, who were, individuals that changed this country. They were the movers and shakers of probably the 1950s and 60s. Civil engineers, very well-to-do and very well-educated individuals. My grandmother was probably one of the first individuals in this country to become a graphic artist, or a female graphic artist, I should say. And obviously, from a service point of view, both grandparents and great-grandparents were in national service, and World War I and World War II. Seeing that, and other family members that had joined the forces and actually chose to provide their commitment to their countries in potentially the ultimate sacrifice, actually drove me towards the process of thinking about how I was going to give back to the community and the people that I live in or lived within. And the first one really was, at the age of 8 when the first Gulf War happened, and it turned around and I sort of thought to myself, actually, these sort of things are happening in the world. They're catastrophic, seeing the death and the damage that happened. And I turned around and I sort of said to myself, well, actually, I want to be an individual that's going to stand up for the people, an individual that's going to be able to stand and put something forward and make a change. And I've lived literally my whole life in relation to that process ever since. I made that promise to myself when I was about 8 years old. I spent many years, struggling physically to try to achieve the outcome of joining the forces. And there was that slogan, I don't know if you'll remember it, 99.99% need not apply. That was one of the key factors that actually changed my life. I thought, actually, I could be that 0.01% of the community that could make those prospective changes, actually, become somebody that is worth something to others on that side of things. And then at the age of 21, I decided to actually join the Royal Marines. I joined it, I passed out I was probably a young chap at the time, so 2007, 2008 I passed out, and I joined this amazing group of men that all had drive, direction, ambition, the want, to create positive change to not just their environments, but also to do their best by their country, to fight for their country, and to be, at the sharp point of everything. Unfortunately, in the year 2008, which was actually quite early into my service, I sustained quite a significant accident. That led to a brain injury, spinal injuries, back injuries, muscular injuries, and so forth. And as I said in my earlier speech, it took 3 years of recovery to go into Headley Court and recovery services. Past that point, I was unfortunately medically discharged out of service in the year 2011. I spent 9 months on thinking, oh my word, what am I going to do now? How am I going to move forwards? I've got a wife, I've got a flat, I've got a mortgage, I've got all these things that are coming to the norms of individuals' life. And I was thinking, how on earth am I going to sort of take the next steps? And 9 months, I sat there struggling, not knowing what to do, and I was fortunate enough to actually then be taken on into employment by one of the UK's largest government contractors to provide information, advice and guidance and support services to the long-term unemployed, the economically inactive, and to support those individuals back into brighter futures for themselves and their families. That took into account, obviously, generational worklessness and a lot of other difficult things that we as a community have always suffered. And that I changed roughly about 400 people's lives positively, giving them a direction and drive forwards. Moving on a little bit, I actually then went on to set up a community interest company that was directed at supporting the veteran cohort, to support them into moving themselves forwards, from injuries and so forth. And from the experiences of working within the DWP and the government contracting sector, I was able to provide not from only personal experience, but also from the experiences of the more larger organisations. In relation to that, I've seen the difficulties of individuals who've lived through the homelessness, through poor education, through years of austerity. And the reason why, I've come to this point now, and I will wind up on this one, is because I can't see an effective leader. That may become a bit of a contentious point that I'm making on that side of things. But we're living in a world where we're the first by the post. It's going to be the first by the post on the day of election. It's going to be, Rishi. It's going to be Keir. It's going to be whichever other political leader it may be. But actually, for all the policies that the government's come up with, for all of the wants and the ability for individuals to speak openly and freely, they're still tied by their political masters as such. So from my side of things, I'm here standing in front of you basically sort of saying, I want to be your voice, I want to serve you again, and I want to actually be able to be an individual that makes that positive changes for you as a community. I personally live in Verwood. I've chosen to live here for the past 9 years. I've brought my children into this environment. They go to school in the locality. It's one of those things that I understand, the struggles and the strains of reality. I didn't have a skybox when I was, younger, and unfortunately I didn't go to private school. But in relation to that, my ambition and my drive is to actually support you to the best of my abilities, and from me to you, I promise to you that I will do the best that I can. That's basically me out on that side of things, and I'll pass over to the gentleman.
Right, well, I won't read out the Green Party manifesto. You'll be pleased to hear that. Just a very quick bit, why am I here? There's some events in our lives that cast a long shadow. When I was young, growing up in Africa, I was very used to being able to drive out of Nairobi with my parents, and I saw the most fantastic wildlife. Took it completely for granted. There was one particular year where there was a drought, and that was grim. You would see dead animals. It was shocking. But it was that one year. Moving on, I became a mining engineer. Again, I saw the environment. Working in Ghana on a gold mine, they were processing the gold ore, and they used arsenic to process gold ore. And you could see across this beautiful verdant green jungle, you could see a line of grey, dead trees. And I asked what that was, and they said, well, that's the smokestack from the refinery there. That's just the arsenic. So I registered that and thought, okay, this is where I realized I made a big mistake as a youngster. I always assumed people older than me, more wiser, were making sure that things didn't get out of hand. So I saw this arsenic trail and I thought, oh, well, it must be okay. No problem, there's plenty of other jungle. So growing up, moved on, coal mining in this country. Working on open cast coaling, I saw at first hand how incredibly destructive that was. You just rip this massive hole out of the ground and you leave a mess. You put it back some years later, it looks a bit better, but for 10, 15 years, it's absolutely shocking mess. So I saw that, not very happy with it. When Margaret Thatcher, bless her, began to close down the coal industry, for all sorts of reasons, we won't go into those here, I was quite relieved to get out of it, to be honest. So, this is my point. I always thought other people somewhere else would make the right decisions. Now, as I've got older, I've realized that hasn't been happening. The news about what's happening around the world to the environment is absolutely shocking. The animals that I saw in Africa, for every 10 that was there before then, when I was a youngster, there's now something like 3 left. We are just absolutely destroying this planet. So I started off by becoming a member of Greenpeace. Just put some money into their coffers, because I was really impressed with what those guys were doing. They were taking a rubber dinghy, they were getting between them and a whaling ship and a whale, okay? They were putting their boat in harm's way, and I thought, they're bloody brave, braver than I am, have some money. Then I joined Friends of the Earth because I like the name, Friends of the Earth. It sounds about right. I thought, yeah, that's what we need. We need some of that. Time went by, things just continually got worse. 2018, I heard about a group called Extinction Rebellion. I went up to London for the first Extinction Rebellion event. I was part of the groups that blocked 5 bridges, and we thought we were going to get some attention. Yeah, we did. The right-wing press, bless them, had a right go at the protesters. Not, what are you protesting about? Oh, bloody protesters sitting in the middle of a bridge. Now we've got Insulate Britain have come along. We've got Just Stop Oil. These are desperate citizens trying to make a point. Pay attention, look at what is happening, and do something about it. And what did the press do? Look at the bloody protesters. What a nuisance they are. 2019, I decided to stand for the Green Party. Not because I had any great hope of winning, but because I wanted this to be a democracy where if you want to vote for something else, you can. There's a box you can put your tick in. I'm here again now, 5 years on, and have things got better in the environment? No, they have not. We are reaching beyond crisis. We are really in danger of just driving the bus off the cliff. So I'm passionate that we have to stop that. That's why I'm here, to give anybody who realizes the danger we're in the opportunity to vote for the Green Party, not because you think I might get in, but because you know you have to tell the other parties, pay attention and do something about this. It's absolutely critical. So that's why I'm here. Thank you very much.
So we now have some questions from the floor. So the way this is going to work, it's a bit like speed dating, if you've ever seen that. We will ask questions, and each candidate has 1 minute, and I'm going to keep you to that, candidates, 1 minute, because politicians, they do go on a bit, don't they? 1 minute to respond, and then if the asker of the question would like to follow up with just another question or some clarity, then they are welcome to. Now, we've got some questions submitted in advance, and my colleague Will is going to hopefully rush down towards me with a whole host of other questions as well. And so the options are, you may, if you would like to, come and ask your question at the microphone here, or if you would are of a more shy disposition, just ask me to read it out on your behalf. Does that sound all right? So the first category we're going to talk about is law and order. And hopefully on the screen there will be and so we have one question about law and order so far. And this is from a lady called Alice Welch. Is Alice here at all? Do you want to come forward and ask your question?
Hi everyone. I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on prisons? Obviously, the state of our prisons at the moment is appalling. Rates of reoffending are the highest in Europe. Obviously, we've got Guy's Marsh. The cafe there has just been closed, so they've lost the ability to work. What are your views? What do you think we can do about this? Yeah, that's it, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice.
Thank you very much for the question. And the state of our prisons is a disgrace. You're quite right to land on that. And proximity to Guy's Marsh, that has changed and is changing. It's having work done to it at the moment, but I think nowhere near fast enough. There's been a program around for a very long time to provide an additional, I can't remember, something between 15 and 20,000 additional places. And yet, years later, we're still going through this. If prison means anything, it has to remain, where we're sat, in a church, it has to provide some kind of form of redemption and a prospect for the future. And as Liberal Democrats, we're absolutely wedded to justice being the path back to a better life. So we would want to see investment in that as part of our overall investment in infrastructure, which we are propose to add £19 billion per year to the infrastructure programme to enable just that kind of thing.
Great. Time's up. Thank you. James.
Thank you, and thanks very much for the question. And in my opening remarks, I used the term a degraded public realm, and nowhere is the degradation of our public realm over the last 14 years more clear than the state of our prisons, which are absolutely shameful. And if Labour has the privilege of forming the next government, there will have to be, and there will be, I believe, a long-term rebuilding of all aspects of our public services, including prisons. One thing that an incoming Labour government would do, though, which over the long term will hopefully reduce the pressure on our prisons, is to introduce
5 seconds left.
A Young Futures programme, which is looking to do what the Sure Start programme did under the last Labour government, but to take those comprehensive wraparound principles and apply it to young people so they don't go into prison in the first place.
Thank you. I'm going to... Si. Yep.
Okay, obviously I'll stand for this one. Firstly, thank you for the question. And actually it's quite a topical one that I've done in the past in relation to the work that I've done with veterans and through the gate services. Part and parcel of the provision really is to make sure that there is something for them to come out to, as well as what there is on the inside. The idea really would also be to be looking at the prevention of crime rather than and what other historical services can actually and terms can actually be provided to them rather than actually being put into the prison service in the first instance. From my side of things, personally, I would like to look at through the gate services, and I'd also look to. On that side of things, I'll be quick. Okay, but thank you for the question because it is something that I'm incredibly passionate about. Thank you.
Alice, thank you for your question. I'm actually patron of the Friends of Guy's Marsh, so I spend quite a lot of time in the prison. Now, I'm sure some people say most Tories should spend more time in prison, but I'll just tee up the lines and see who laughs. There's 3 points I want to make. The first is we've been involved with Friends working with others about getting local businesses in for employment events to recruit people so that they have an opportunity when they finish their sentence. There's no point just putting people outside and saying, you know, here's 20 quid, crack on with it, because they will usually reoffend because they have no alternative. That's the first thing. There are 2 things I've always campaigned on and will continue to do. The first is we cannot compel a prisoner who is illiterate or innumerate to learn to read and write whilst in prison. We can encourage, but we can't compel. And I think that should change. The other is a planning issue. James mentioned the reform to the planning system. We have to restore the Crown prerogative because the delay in the delivery of new prisons has been held up in the planning process where people have objected to the applications, and that's been the real problem.
I'll be quick, this is not going to take a minute. All I can say about prisons is if you treat people like animals, then you will not get a very good result. We need to treat people with respect. Whatever their conditions are there in prison, there'll be a reason why they were there. They weren't born criminals. It happened to them. Okay, that's all I've got to say. You have to treat people like criminals.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. We have another question from Richard James. Is Richard in the audience this evening? Richard, come forward.
Good evening all. Really my question quite simply is the current complaints and misconduct process is not working. So, you know, we have police forces marking their own homework. They're covering a lot of things under the carpet. In the case of Dorset Police, for example, they actually deliberately put information against the wrong LSAs So, you know, things that have happened at Winfrith are actually recorded on a neighbouring block of houses. There's like 42 residents, and it's like Midsummer's Murders if you actually look at the crime stats. What are your various parties going to do to actually overhaul the complaints and misconduct process?
Well, thank you for your question, Richard. I'm going to channel my inner Darren Jones here and admit that when I don't know the answer, that I'm just going to not pretend that I do. But I absolutely believe in the principles of accountability, and I think there has been across the board a huge lack of accountability in recent years. But I would welcome the opportunity, if I'm elected, to work with you to fully understand the detail of the specific case that you mentioned, and looking forward to taking that forward.
Richard, we've met and spoken, so I feel slightly advantaged because I know what you're talking about and you'll understand, but I don't think it's sensible to go into all of the detail here. But I think organisations like the police have to command transparent public confidence. It's absolutely key. And when a rotten apple appears, as we've seen in the Met and other forces, they have got to be removed and sorted out. And one of the very peculiar duties I've got as local government minister is to sign the paperwork to forfeit an ex-police officer's pension if they have been found guilty of an offence in the courts. And I have not hesitated to do so on a public interest issue, because I think public confidence in the police is absolutely key. Now, I think broadly our police are a good bunch of women and men trying their hardest, often in very difficult circumstances. But as I say, it's that one rotten apple that spoils the whole barrel, which is why the Ombudsman and the complaints process has to be easy to use, clear, simple and swift.
I don't really have very much to add to what's already been said, so that's short.
I'll stand up again if that's okay. Just very quickly, how long has it been going on for?
For me, 10 years, personally.
10 years?
Yes.
10 years.
And so I've had my life absolutely destroyed by Dorset Police. It's now my intention to set up the first non-profit to actually tackle police corruption in this country.
Well, amazing, firstly, on that side of things, and congratulations on taking those steps. From my side of things, accountability is key for all. In not only just the police force, but other services and actually us as politicians. But 10 years is far too long for it to have been going on for. And a decision, a process should be put in place to rectify it for yourself. Okay. Obviously, just very quickly, they could probably take a little bit of a leaf out the NHS ombudsman side of things. They're very quick. Literally, they respond as quickly as possible. So hopefully there might be a bit of work that can be done on that side of things. But well done to you. Thank you.
I'm sorry to hear about the trials that you've been through, but I just want to, the only thing I'd add to the comments of others is that policing is by consent in this country. It's a really important element of that we consent to be policed by the organisations, by the constabularies that are alongside us in our communities. And that consent is it should be held dearly by the constabulary as well as the people. So transparency is key, and the comments of others I agree with. But, if elected, pick up the baton from others.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much, Richard. We're going to move on to our next topic area. If we can put the slides down. Defence. Now, we don't have any questions on defence, which seems slightly interesting given that we are a military town and a military area. So, has anyone got any questions on defence before we move on? Okay, one question over there. Would you like to come forward and ask it?
Only to hear everybody's comment on the idea that has come forward from the Conservatives that there be
National Service. Okay. A response to the proposal for national service. So Simon is the member of the party proposing that policy.
Well, I can barely remember which is my left and which is my right foot, so I'm very glad I didn't have to do it because I'd be terrible at marching. Do you know what? When I talk to young people, and this is particularly true, I think, through COVID, they want to do something in their communities to pay back. That's my first point. The second point I'd make is they all laughed at the Duke of Edinburgh, the late Duke of Edinburgh, when he created the D of E scheme. They thought that was wacky. They thought young people just wanted to sit at home and listen to the Beatles or whatever. And he proved them wrong. And what a great success story for our nation the DOE has been. Now, I haven't got all the details of the National Service Plan, but anything I think which brings our young together in what is increasingly an isolated world of Xbox and telephone screen and iPad, working together to solve problems, to make a positive difference in their communities at a very formative time of their lives, learning new skills, building new contacts, improving the areas in which they live, I think that's worth a look. And I think we will be pleased with what the outcomes are.
Well, I take a different view, and I think it's pretty rich of Rishi Sunak to potentially ask or insist that our young people do mandatory service when he can't even be bothered to attend the full duration of the D-Day celebrations. So, and to the broader point, yes, there is more that we could be looking to do to instill a sense of civic pride in some parts of some of our communities. And yes, there are big problems in our armed forces, but this solution doesn't tackle either of those issues in my view.
Looking at some of today's youth, I'm not sure it's a good idea teaching them how to fire guns. But on a more serious note, I did 4 years at a naval training establishment, so I did 4 years in uniform, very military background schooling. And what that taught me was how to be a bit of a rebel, so I'm not sure it actually works terribly well. I do think there's a case for giving youngsters a way of becoming part of a community, of feeling part of a community that's positive. I'm not sure that fighting and killing people is very positive, but occasionally you have to do it, I'm afraid.
As an idea, it's got some merit. A structured scheme for young people to engage with has some merit. The timing, completely wrong. Expedient, it's obviously cobbled together, foisted out, and aimed not at the generation that would have to actually think that's a good idea, i.e. young people, but instead aimed squarely at an older part of the electorate. Get some kids, get them out there, away from their iPads and doing something good for the community. I think young people are capable of making that choice for themselves. As for its impact on defence, my view is let's concentrate on fixing the regular army first, then deal with the reserves, and at some point later we can deal with this kind of scheme in the right time.
Obviously, I'm standing again, and I apologise on that. In relation to this point, does anyone know what the AFC, the Army Cadet Forces, and the Sea Cadets are, and the Royal Air Force Cadets, and the CCF? Yeah, okay, that's fantastic. I joined that at the age of 13, it gave me a fantastic start with knowing how to iron, how to use a weapon, and how to, look after myself and do a little bit of fieldcraft. It sort of helped towards going in the Royal Marines as well. I don't know why we have to look at the process of national conscription for those aspects to be actually provided to the community. Actually, maybe we should look at asking the community to support those aspects of things on a okay, yeah, fantastic. On a more often basis, because that breeds the better community that we're looking for.
Fantastic. We're going to move on to our next topic, if we can, education and employment. So we have a number of questions submitted already in advance about education and employment. There was one submitted by two individuals which pretty much mirror each other. And the question is, we have a recruitment and retention crisis in teaching. How would your party correct this? Should we start with you, Ken, and we'll work our way down this way?
Is that on? Yes, it is. I think one of the things we've got to do is to pay teachers what they're worth. They do an incredible job. So I think the first thing we need to do to retain retention is to actually get teachers paid what they're worth. We also need to think about what we're teaching kids. It feels like it's a bit of a sausage factory at the moment. You get on this conveyor belt and you churn out what you want at the end of it. And I don't think it's giving children a complete perspective on life. So very briefly, I was at a farm this afternoon where there's a farmer who's doing a fantastic job. He actually gets school kids in and he's got a small kitchen and he teaches them this is what food looks like, this is where it's come from, and this is how you prepare it. That's the kind of thing I think we need to teach children. And just going back to very briefly my bit when I was at the military school, yes, I did learn how to sew my own clothes, so there were some talents that I came out with.
Yeah, so stood up again. So in relation to education, my children are, she's 10 and my son is 7. They go to a school, it's fantastic, but today I actually found out that the curriculum may not have been updated since 2013. That's off part actually on this side of things, but the process of retention of staff, we should be incentivising them by potentially giving them a better pay, but better benefits in relation to the work that they do, and potentially recognising what they bring to the community and the children that we are bringing into this world. I hope that sort of helps on my points of view. Thank you.
If there was ever an investment that made sense for pretty well everything that we have, it's education. So we need to value our teachers more. Some of that is going to be in pay. But more than that, it's in the esteem in which we hold our teachers. We all remember the kind of teacher that made the impact on every one of us. But it's more than just pay. The surroundings that they're in, the school buildings that they're in, the way that they're designed, the way that they're maintained is all equally important. And I think that that's the investment. It must be holistic. It's about people plus.
Well, I agree with a lot of that, so I won't repeat the points that have been made. I would say, though, that Labour absolutely recognises the crisis in retention and recruitment of teachers, and that's why one of Labour's first 6 steps, you might have heard about the 6 steps, the 6 first steps, is to recruit 6,500 new teachers. That's not going to solve the teaching crisis overnight, but it is an important step, and it's an indication of the direction of travel that a Labour government would go under. And I think one small point to make as well is that since 2010, we've had no fewer than 10 education secretaries, and that is incredibly disruptive to teachers and educators. So one thing that Labour, I hope, would do very differently than the Conservatives is to end this revolving door of education secretaries so that our teachers can get on with the most important job of all, which is teaching and raising our young people.
Many of the articles I've written in the Blackmore Vale magazines has included a thanks, usually at the end of the academic year, to our teachers. And I've visited, I think I'm right to say, virtually every school in the constituency. We've got some fantastic schools and some fantastic teachers. My eldest daughter has just finished her GCSEs today in Gillingham. I've got two other daughters there, and they had been at St Gregory's in Marnell. Amanda's yawning. I think she's heard me say this before, at a different Hustings. So actually just saying thank you, I think, is quite helpful. I don't have a silver bullet. We live in a very diverse world with regards to employment opportunities with a huge amount of choice. I think the first thing that usually attracts people to a job is to think that they are valued, and personally, I do. Pay, we can talk about. Facilities, yes, of course. But let's just say thank you to our teachers at the end of this academic year.
So we have another question on education. I'm going to invite Richard Jones to come and ask his question in person.
Good evening. Richard Jones, I'm the head teacher at Bryanston School here in Blandford. And just for some context, so you're all aware, we're an independent school, aged 3 to 18, and we educate just over 800 pupils. And just to add a little bit more context, our contribution as a school to the GDP of this local authority area is just over £24 million, and the number of jobs that we support in this local area is 792. I'm pleased we're talking about education and employment in the same category, because obviously they go hand in hand. I absolutely believe that our state sector needs to be better funded. I have best friends who have been head teachers in the state sector who have left it because of the conditions in which they're working in. One of the main debate points of this election has been around the potential Labour policy of introducing VAT on school fees and the removal of business rate relief. There is a misconception that all independent schools in this country are like Eton and Harrow. You only need to go onto Company's House to see that Bryanston School just about breaks even every year. For us, the options presented by Sir Keir Starmer have been either to pass on this 20% VAT on school fees to our parents, which we think would end up losing about 20% of them, costing us just over £5 million a year, or we absorb it ourselves. We don't make any surplus to absorb it. If we did, it would cost us just over £4 million a year. Our biggest cost is our staff, and it's the people we value the most, along with our pupils. How do we make this policy work for the pupils at Bryanston and for all the people that we employ in this area? I'd like your views, please, on that policy.
So, should we start with Si?
Okay, well, obviously, from my side of things, thank you, and thank you for the contribution that the school does provide to the community. I've actually got friends that have got children that come to your school. So, and obviously they can't speak highly enough of it in relation to, you know, the education and the facilities that you provide. In relation to the policy side of things, don't vote for the people that are going to see you off. That's basically how I would say it. You know, vote for the people that are going to actually support you. If the people are going to see you off, you know, just put them to one side. I'll sit in with you, and I'll find a way, you know, around things. You know, I'd put my voice to your voice, and hopefully then we could change a policy and make things better for the whole of the country on that side of things. Sorry, that's me preaching.
Thank you. Should we go for Gary next? Yeah.
Richard, thanks very much for the question. The Liberal Democrats have a basic principle that education shouldn't be taxed. Bust. So we also believe in individual choice, and therefore it's a parent's choice as to where they should send their children for education. But on a wider note, I think it's incumbent on the sector to, I was about to say do more, but actually there are parts of the sector that are extremely active with their charitable work, and you've cited your own school's engagement with the community. I think there's more to be done to communicate that, and where things can't be communicated, it means that there's probably an absence. And actually, it's incumbent on the whole sector to pull together and demonstrate its social value.
Agreed.
This isn't a field that I'm very experienced in, so I'll be honest about that. So the naval school that I went to was an independent school when I first went to it, and partway through my time there, it got taken over by Gwynedd Council in North Wales. So it is possible to run an independent school like that with a council. By the way, however it was funded, I don't know. It did close after I left. I don't take any credit for that. I have a feeling that elitism is something we need to be aware of. Everybody deserves a good education, a chance at a good education. How it's funded is a little bit beyond my pay grade. I'm sorry, I've got nothing else to offer on that.
Well, thank you, Richard, for the question. And just to be completely straightforward with you, this is a Labour policy, and therefore, if I'm elected as a Labour MP, I would intend to vote in favour of it. That's why I'm standing as a Labour candidate, not an independent candidate. In terms of trying to find ways to make this work with you, which is, I think, the root of your question, I would be in a better position as a Labour MP with if the polls are right, likely Labour government coming in, to make the case that you are an unintended consequence of this policy, and that this policy, as you may consider it, to be too blunt an instrument. And it may well be possible that there could be delays to the implementation of this, or there could be certain exemptions for particular types of schools. And as a Labour MP with a Labour government, I believe I'd be the best person to take that forward for you.
Well, the closure of Bryanston would be a hammer blow to the economy of Blandford and the surrounding area. And just sort of filling in a gap in Gary's knowledge, the work that you do with Blandford School, talking to Sally Wilson, the head there, is phenomenal. So it's not just the bursaries and the charity work and the community stuff that you did over COVID, but it's tying in the two schools, sharing facilities. And again, thank you for that. I've no skin in the game. I was state educated, the first of my family to go to university. My 3 kids are state educated too. You offer soft power benefits to UK PLC. You take pressure off the state sector. This is a piece of red meat cooked up by Keir Starmer to throw to his left wing to get them to chew on that whilst he effectively continues our economic policies and other things. Let's not make any bones about it. That's probably the most political thing I'm going to say this evening. It's the wrong policy for the wrong motivations, and Labour have been told what the consequences are, and Bridget Phillipson, your Shadow Education Secretary, has ignored us every step of the way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shall we move on to our next? Taxation, the economy and business. I'm just checking down my list of questions submitted already. We haven't had one on that, but we probably have in advance here. 2 seconds. Right, so we have a question in advance from G. Adams. Are they in the house? Do you want to come and ask it, or do you like me to ask it?
Is that the one about the wealth fund?
Pumping oil from the North Sea.
Yeah, right, okay. As I understand it, we have been pumping oil from the North Sea for approximately 50 years. I was up in Aberdeen. I've seen what it did to the local economy. Wonderful, fantastic. A lot of people got very rich. And what happened to all this money that the country obtained from pumping oil? Why didn't we have a sovereign wealth fund? Every other country in the world, as far as I know, has got a sovereign wealth fund. For some strange reason, Britain never did. And what did our illustrious Prime Minister do? She gave it to the miners as dole money. Instead of building new economies, exactly the same thing is happening now. We're wasting our resources. There's opportunities to make a green economy, a new economy coming with new prospects. And all we're doing is we're wasting our money. Why has it taken 50 years for this country to get real? And okay, it's the Labour's idea, but it seems a crazy idea. Why didn't this happen 50 years ago? When things are tough, we've got no money. Oh, we're broke. We can't afford to pay teachers, NHS, anybody else. We're pumping sewage into the rivers, and we haven't got the staff because we can't afford them, because we're not paying them enough, and we don't give them enough power. We're running to rats, and if we'd have done something 50 years ago, we'd have had a bit of money to slosh around and maybe fix some of the major problems that we have got now. So, come on, boys. Why has it taken 50 years?
So, just for clarity in one sentence, Sovereign Wealth Fund, why only now?
You better sit down in answer to my answer to your question. In broad terms, I agree with you. Norway did it and have done phenomenally well. We were going through, unlike Norway, it just happened to be the case. I was 5 at the time, so you can't blame me. But we were going through a transition in our economy, we know that. And you're right, it was slightly robbing Peter to pay Paul. But the opportunities that a sovereign wealth fund would have provided for infrastructure and strategic investment is a regrettable missed opportunity. And I share your frustration with it. Yeah. I could come up with a load of old guff. That's my honest answer. I agree basically with the premise of your question.
Margaret Thatcher, Cameron, bloody Blair, I beg your pardon, Johnson, they've just, excuse me, they've pissed it against the wall. They've lost the plot.
I sense your frustration. James.
Well, as you pointed out, Mr. Adams, a National Wealth Fund is in the Labour Party manifesto. So, yes, better late than never. 50 years ago, I was not even a twinkle in my father's eye. But I agree with you that there have been decades of wasted opportunity, and the counterexample of Norway is very, very instructive. More or less, it's the same oil, and they now have one of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds, which provides the people there with a very good standard of living. And one other point to show that Labour, I think, is in some ways coming round to your way of thinking, is GB Energy, which will be a nationally owned, publicly owned, clean energy company. We've seen that it's still considered to be good enough for our European counterparts. They have publicly owned energy companies. It's about time we had one as well. And if Labour win the election, that's what we'll introduce.
Richard, it's a salutary lesson that you've given us, but the moment's gone.
I know.
So what do we do now, I think, is the key, though. So this country has been investing, the public sector investment in the things that we use, the roads, the infrastructure everywhere. I mean, this is almost my specialist subject. But we've been running it about half of what the other countries around us in Europe have been investing for years. And like compound interest, the difference now explains the dramatic difference in productivity between our country and others around us. Now, the fact is, there is no immediate fund to dip into. What we need to do is to start from where we are and invest more than we have been. No magic wand. I'm afraid this is a long escalator out. But it must be done. It must be done.
Okay, obviously, firstly, from my point of view, and it is only my point of view, so I apologise on that side of things. This country has wasted billions and billions and billions of pounds over the years. You know, look at what happened through COVID. You know, £12 billion wasted on certain initiatives and things along those lines. Millions and millions of pounds given to individuals on levels of scandal throughout the government. In relation to my side of things, I personally believe in sort of taxing individuals that pollute the environment on that side of things. You know, I saw you grimace there, you know, on that side of things. I personally do believe that there needs to be a big pot of money for us to be able to bring back, you know, the state ownership, the state ownership of certain aspects, you know, and as you say, bring back, you know, a huge pot of money for us to be able to invest back into the things that we need. I can only apologise for the fact that it's not happened in the past, but obviously in the future, let's hope it does. Okay.
We can't undo what started 50 years ago, I'm afraid. What we can do is stop what's happening now. With, for example, the privatisation of the water industry, whereby billions of pounds has gone to Canadian pension funds and other pension funds, has been drained away from us taxpayers instead of being retained in this country and reinvested in our own infrastructure. So the Green Party would very definitely be looking at nationalising, taking back our national assets.
I'll be very naughty. Can I just make a brilliant suggestion? We've got no money because we spent it all. Okay, the sun is up there, global warming means it'll get hotter. What I want to know is why every flipping factory unit and house with a south-facing roof hasn't got solar panels on. They don't have to be made in China. We can make them here and get jobs, people to fit it.
Sorry, just 2 secs. So we've strayed into the environment, we've been sitting a long time. I need to go and put my password into my laptop so the screen's work again. Would you just like to stand, stretch your legs for a moment, say hello to the person next to you, and we'll resume in about 60 seconds. Does that sound all right? Let's go for it that way. Yes. Just a quick question or a quick kind of query. I read out a question on someone's behalf. They've just asked if they could have a right of reply. It was in the education section, so I'm just going to give them right of reply just to respond to what was said, if that's all right.
Good evening. Thank you very much. The question that I asked about recruitment and retention, I would just like to draw your attention to the fact that the government missed its recruitment target for teachers by 38% last year and by 50% in the secondary sector. Also, that 8.8% of teachers left the teaching profession last year, not for reasons related to retirement or death. Okay? With all due respect, thank yous and being grateful are not going to be enough to reverse that. We have an absolutely atrocious position for recruitment, especially in some subjects. And I haven't really heard anything significant from the parties to suggest how you will address that. Thank you.
If I could just add on to that, I was the other person who put a question in, so just to add a little bit more, there's also been in the last 10 years a 10% cut in real terms in school funding in the state sector, and that has had a massive, massive impact across all state schools. Thank you.
Do we want to say something in reply, son, James? Hang on, 2 secs. Simon, you have to press up.
There is now, there's 2 things I made the point of. First of all, more money is now in education for our schools, particularly in our rural areas, for which I fought alongside our F40 colleagues, number 1. Number 2, in 2010, 62% of our schools were rated good. It's now 98%. And we are at the highest point that we have ever been in literacy and numeracy in the international league tables measuring that. So, not without challenge, I know, and we've discussed this before on previous conversations. But let's not just lose sight of the good things which have been done. Apprentices and T-levels as well. We now have the widest range of free educational opportunities for our young people at any time in our history. That's a record from which we can build, and it's a record of which I'm proud.
There are 28,000 fewer apprenticeships than there were a couple of years ago. It's Liberal Democrat policy, whatever you think about our position in terms of influencing this. It's Liberal Democrat policy, costed in our manifesto, to increase for the next 5 years the per pupil education provision at above inflation to try and close this gap.
Well, you asked about what the parties would do, and I mentioned one of Labour's first 6 steps will be to recruit 6,500 new teachers. And how will that be paid for? That comes back to the other question that we had, because one of the very few tax rises that Labour has announced, and this has been trailed for many months, this is not news this week with the publication of the manifesto, is to apply VAT on private schools. And the answer that I gave to that question earlier on shows that this is a very contentious issue, and this is a difficult decision, but in my view, notwithstanding the specifics that I would undertake to properly understand, and if there are any exemptions or anything, then we can look at those. But the principle is the right one. One of the tragedies of the last 14 years is the way that our young people and the schools that they inhabit have been treated, and it will fall to Labour to repair that system. We did it before under the last Labour government, and we will do it again, in my view, if we return a Labour government on the 4th of July.
Firstly, from my side of things, I'm probably not the best person to speak about this, so I would actually ask you your opinion, and I'd like to actually have a chat with you afterwards and just see as to what is actually going on in the sector, and actually speak with you, because obviously you're more knowledgeable than myself on that side of things. That's me sort of putting myself out on the limb there, you know, on that side of things, but it's better to talk with experience rather than just create a policy and go by the policy, really, on that side of things. And that's why I want to be here. I want you to get your voices heard in Westminster, and if the policy's not right, it shouldn't be voted for, you know, on that side of things. Yeah, thank you, but I'm happy to have a chat. Thank you.
Right, we're going to move on now, and we're going to cover the transport and the environment. And Giles Adams, is Giles in the house? If you've already asked a question, we'll find someone else to. So, just because we want to spread, so the best, Nick Henson, is Nick around? No, okay. So I'll have to pick up my pile of papers. Right. So, Stephen Deutsch. Do you want to come and ask your question?
Yes.
Good evening. Aside from the Green Party, none of the current parties vying for election have made any serious attempt to address the climate catastrophe which is on our heels. I mean, it's really soon. You can see it all the time, all around you. It isn't just weather, it's climate. And it's existential threat to our children and grandchildren. We might get great profit, lots of money out of doing nothing and keeping the old things going. But that's not really good enough for our kids and grandkids, is it? So what will the other parties, and know what Greens would do really to address this seriously without the nonsense about, well, we're meeting our COP convention things like that? Those are meaningless. You've got to have a sea change in the way we do things in order really to save our progeny. Thank you.
Sorry, do you want to go first? Ken, did you want to respond? Or...
Keep it away from him. Yeah, what can I say? Green Party, definitely. The only point I would make there is that this isn't something to worry about for our progeny. This is something to worry about for ourselves. It's here, it's on us, it's starting now. It's not going to get any better, it's going to get worse. And people talk about, oh, well, we've just got to adapt to it. You cannot keep adapting to something which is continually getting worse. That's the only point I would make. We have to wake up. We have to wake up now. We don't have time to faff about for another 5 years.
A couple of hard policies that the Liberal Democrats would intend to implement. One is to insulate the homes. So we've done a lot of the easy stuff so far. You know, we've got a seas full of turbines, and they should be even more full. But the hard stuff is in people's houses. And the first step we've got to take is to insulate the homes of the poorest. And we've set aside £8.3 billion in our costings to achieve that in the next few years. People on low wages can't afford that, but that's a big lump of investment that's needed to start. And kick-starting with that will enable a market to open up for the rest of us to follow suit more cheaply. We'll also have 90% of our power generated from renewables by 2030. Those are hard targets.
Well, I've mentioned GB Energy a couple of times, so I won't say anything more on that. And often in Labour Party context, the climate question comes back to the previous figure that we had of £28 billion, which is no longer there. But the reason that figure, it's important to say, is no longer there is because the Conservatives crashed the economy, and the level of commitment that we wanted to make doesn't seem plausible any longer. And we have Liz Truss primarily to thank for that. But we do have just as much level of ambition in the Labour Party, particularly people of my generation. We absolutely get this. I agree with all the words you use. This is an existential crisis. We have no time to waste. And I think what's really important for the Labour Party is that we need to avoid any suggestion that we're thinking of tackling the climate crisis as something that's nice to have. And instead, we have to see it as the central star that everything else orbits around. And I think that that is what the next Labour government will be doing.
Let me start by doing what I did for quite a lot of the 2019 election campaign, which is agreeing with Ken. This is not a problem for tomorrow, it's a problem for today. And it's for us, not our children, to sort out. So I fundamentally disagree with your assessment, and I say that respectfully. We were the first government to legislate in the world for net zero. Stuff is being done. Go and talk to the steel workers in Port Talbot who are seeing their jobs disappear at the moment, whilst the Port Talbot steelworks green themselves. 90% more solar in the UK than in 2010. Wind, both onshore and offshore, up by something like 62%. And on an average day, it's about 60 to 65% of our domestic energy needs are met through renewables. More to do, but a foundation stone of progress from which we can build.
May I have a follow-up?
Sorry, I'm going to ask a personal redirect if I can. So I live in a tied property as a minister of the Church of England. How can you convince landlords to make investment in sustainable energy when it's not in their financial interest to do so?
Landlords? Just in general, people who've... Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you can legislate for it if you want to. You can do that. So the point about... a lot of the policies, you keep hearing, we can't afford it right now, we can't afford it right now. You know, let's push it back. We'll do it some other time. We'll do it, you know, a couple of years down the road. We'll kick the can down the road, let someone else pick up the pieces. The problem with that is every day that you do that, it gets more expensive to pick up the pieces. And these are not just costs, they actually are investments. So when, for example, you invest in putting insulation into people's homes, what you then do is you reduce, A, the country's energy bill, and B, you reduce the cost of living for the individual who's just had their house insulated. So there are benefits to that, and the benefits are not being talked about. It's all about cost, cost, cost. We can't afford it. We can't afford not to do it. That's the only point I would make.
The one point that I would just sort of try to make on that side of things is, you know, if pollution is for profit in any way, shape or form, we should tax the providers of the pollution. And we can then utilise those taxes to return the environment and the local, locations that we live in back to a better quality of, I suppose, existence really on that side of things. So yeah, tax the for-profit polluters.
I'm really just adding to the point about our policy on insulation. It's got to be combined with legislation, but also making it easier for people to adopt it, which is the point about leading the way with insulating the houses of the poorest, who simply can't afford it, is making a market, is doing the very thing that the green, the green grants that were cut off earlier on. It basically killed the market for heat pumps and conversions that were in the offing at the time. Sticking to policy and making it clear this is stable, long-term policy gives people the chance to actually invest, make things cheaper, and roll it out for the rest of us. So it would be in the interests of the Church of England to do that in due course.
And what I'm about to say is not Labour Party policy, but it's an idea. I think when it comes to insulation of church buildings, I don't think it's realistic to expect individuals to fund that, but there are sources of capital that could be looked at to invest in these types of insulation, because solar panels reduce the cost of energy bills, so that in turn can repay the capital. And I think if you want to look at what might be an interesting source of finance to fund a mass rollout of solar panels on the church estate, I think a good place to look is the Church of England Pensions Board.
In terms of landlord's duties, I think in broad terms it has to be the interests of the owner of the asset to make it as desirable to live in and as cost efficient as possible. So I think there's a motivation there. I do wish the mortgage companies would actually take into account a more modern definition of energy efficiency costs when actually assessing what a mortgage could be allowed. They don't do it at the moment. That's a great shame. I was really pleased to support, Chris, the bid that the church put in here for its renovation, and I saw the huge amount of insulation going in. I didn't know that your house was not going to be included. I'll have a word with Bishop Karen when I see her next and get her to come and do something. One problem which we have, and I broadly agree with what Gary has been saying with regards to individual properties. Here in Dorset, huge amount of listed properties, thatched, no cavity walls, old, conservation areas, etc. To try and retrofit those is incredibly tricky. I'm sure science will find a way, but incredibly tricky under planning at the moment.
Could I have a follow-up to my question?
Yeah, of course you can follow up to your question. Come.
Just one statement that perhaps might concentrate minds. It's concentrated mine. Will it take the failure of the Thames Barrier and Westminster to be under 6 foot of water for people to get it? It's not really about initiatives we can start. It's much more urgent than that. We need to stop subsidizing SUVs. We need to start subsidizing public transport. We need to do this in a big way, not in a way that makes us feel good, because it won't work. That's my view.
Sorry, quick point there. When you said subsidising SUVs, I hope you meant subsidising EVs.
Yeah.
No, SUVs.
You want
there is no real disadvantage for driving a car which uses a colossal amount of energy.
So not subsidise them, tax them, or...
Well, we're in fact, by taxing everyone the same, we're subsidising those.
Okay.
Can I just clarify, it is just a point of clarification. If you look at the road tax bands, if you have a SUV, I think off the top of my head it's something like £672 a year for road tax. So we have introduced some hypothecation there to try to disincentivise. More to be done, I appreciate, but there is work there.
Cool. Right.
Thank you. I was also one of the people that put in a question in relation to the climate crisis. But the second part of my question, which has not been addressed, is what each of the candidates will do to advocate for nature and how their parties will address the biodiversity crisis, which is equally as big a threat to society and also deeply interconnected with the climate crisis.
Do you want to go first? Yeah.
Amanda, you're absolutely right. It's why we have nature at the heart of the Environment Act, as you know, that we will leave a more rich, biodiverse landscape leaving office than when we came in. It's absolutely key, that nexus of wildlife and our environment, our pollinators, our birds, etc. We've got to plant more trees, which is what we are doing. We have to maintain those habitats, which is why it's important to support rewilding schemes where they are. But you cannot view these things, as you well know, in a vacuum. It's all part of a rich mosaic. And I know that our countryside is phenomenally denuded. This morning I took the dogs out for a walk. The first thing I saw were 3 hare in a field of just sprouting turnip. They were having a lovely breakfast, but I was delighted to see those 3 hare.
5 seconds left, Simon.
It enriches our life. We need more of it.
Can I just say to Simon that if he believes that nature is in a better state now than it was when they came into power, then he needs to read the State of Nature report, and I say that as a chartered environmentalist.
Well, perhaps just a couple of quick points on nature. One thing Labour has said is that we will put polluting water companies into special measures, and that includes the threat of criminal action against bosses who oversee continual illegal activity. And we've heard about earlier on the dumping of sewage into our rivers. And we're also committed to reviewing the environmental improvement plan so that it really delivers for nature. And the point that you made at the beginning of your comments about the interconnectedness between the climate and nature crises is absolutely crucial. And I have to say, I'm sure colleagues would agree, we've all received a lot of correspondence from residents over email over the last few weeks. And I have to say that nature has been right at the top of the subject lines that we've had from people. So any of us, if we want to be your MP, have to be completely committed to this agenda, and I certainly would be.
personally back the sewage campaign that the Liberal Democrats have really championed. Personally, I take my place as a water guardian on the Stour and doing my bit, monitoring my sewage outflow, monitoring Wessex Water more closely, to be honest. That I'm going to keep that as my embarrassing moment for a future hustings. So yes, that's important. And again, speaking at hard targets and commitments, planting 60 million trees and doubling nature is a fundamental Liberal Democrat path that we are taking, we wish to take.
Obviously, just from my side of things, I know I've stumbled along sometimes within the comments, but I just wanted to read a piece that I actually wrote in relation to this on my website. And obviously this will be hopefully in context. I've developed a profound and reverential connection with the natural environment, which actually was rooted not only in my personal life growing up in St Albans in a very rural environment, but also whilst I was within the Royal Marines. As a result, I'm personally conscious about minimising the use of printed materials like flyers, especially within this campaign. From my side of things, I've specifically decided not to send flyers out to yourselves because it's a thought process of mine that actually they'll end up in the bin, on that side of things, as with a lot of probably the political paperwork that may come through your door. So it's a personal fervour that lies in the safeguarding of the planet for future generations and strongly support the eradication of for-profit pollution, but simultaneously encouraging recompense for communities impacted by the environmental harm.
Can't argue with any of that. I think well, first of all, tax the polluters. Okay, the problem is that too much of the stuff we have is too cheap, and the reason it's cheap is because you're not paying for the damage that it's done somewhere else. Probably the biggest thing we can do is reform our food supplies. We need to up our game when it comes to farming. We, at the moment, only produce about, not enough, basically. We're okay for meat and dairy here in Dorset. That's no good if you don't eat meat and dairy. What we are incredibly short of is fruit and vegetables. We simply do not grow enough. And there's too many people who are saying, well, we can just get it in from overseas. As climate hits other countries, we will not be able to get it from overseas. So what we need to do is to alter the farming to that we eat less meat. The reason I say that is because meat is a very inefficient way of using your land. So we need to eat less, we need to eat better, it needs to be pasture-fed, and we need to use more ground for fruit and veg, and that will free up a huge amount of land that can then be rewilded. And just very quick point, I grow a bit of food myself, and I've been shocked this year, absolutely shocked, at how few bees and butterflies I've seen so far. It's been that rubbish a year so far, and that's a massive warning sign. So we need to get the chemicals out of farming as well. That's just one more point. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. We're going to move on. We are running out of time very quickly, so we're going to move on to health and social care. We have a question from Alan Pisoni. Is Alan in the building? Do you want to come forward and ask your question?
Good evening, everybody. Where do you see social care in 5 years' time if your party gets elected, especially as Boris came into power with an oven-ready plan?
Great. Well, let's start at this end and work our way to
the way things are going at the moment, I see social care as looking really grim, to be honest, unless we change things. One of the things we have to realise too is that people bang on about immigration. We've got to keep immigrants out. My mother went into a care home for the last 3 years of her life, and most of the people who looked after her were not born in this country. I'll say no more than that. they were really good. They were really good carers. If you've spent any time in the NHS, and I've had to, unfortunately, through family stuff, I've spent a little bit of time in hospitals recently, and you look at the number of people there who are also not being born in this country. So that's what I have to say to you there. Does that help answer your question at all?
No.
No. Okay. Give me the question again.
Where do you see social care in 5 years' time?
Oh, sorry, I answered that. I think it's going to be rubbish if we don't get our finger out and do something about it. So yes, we need to spend more money on it, and we need to recognise, basically, we've got an ageing population here, so there's quite a few people in this room, no offence intended, because I'm one of them, who need to be looking to social care in the near future. So we do need to spend more money on it and recognise it again, that people have to be paid a living wage for what they do. Okay.
Just quickly from a personal side of things, my mother's only getting older, and unfortunately both my grandparents were within adult health and social care for the latter parts of their lives. From my side of things, I believe it needs to be a priority for everybody, because it's something that is going to happen to all of us. And if it isn't, you know, then there's going to be, as Ken says, a grim reality that we're going to have to live.
It's a desperate position that we're in with social care. It's inhumane, the system that's there. The promises that have been made have not been delivered on. And I haven't heard from either Conservatives or Labour anything other than there will be a cap at some time in future. Not really. We know that it's highly unlikely to come off. Liberal Democrats committed to implementing the Scottish system that was implemented in 2002 for free personal care. We see that that will happen in the next 5 years. That's only a first step. It has its faults, but that system means that people don't have to sell their houses to fund rudimentary care. And it is need tested, not means tested. In the same timescale, we expect that a commission would be set up, because fixing this is going to take cross-party commitment over a long period of time to fix. So with that, with a stable policy, then we can move forward, and a better carers allowance in the meantime as well.
I think that last point on approaching this on a cross-party basis is absolutely critical. We've seen, I think most spectacularly, was Theresa May's failure to reform the social care system, and that shows what happens when you approach this on a partisan basis rather than a cross-party issue. So I'm just giving you my opinion. This is not Labour Party policy, but it is my fervent hope that there is some cross-party commission to look at this. We've tried, and Labour has tried and failed in the past to get a lasting solution to the social care crisis. So that is the absolutely critical thing. This is far too big an issue to try and make it a political football. I'm sure everybody in this hall has experiences of struggling to navigate the social care system. I certainly do in my family. So it is my fervent hope that we can finally, on a cross-party basis, start to tackle this.
Thank you for your question. I agree fundamentally with what James has just said. Cross-party, I think, is the right way. I'm the local government minister. I'm one of the 3 cogs in that Whitehall machine with the Department of Health sitting alongside. We've started to do some integration, not enough and not quickly enough. It's a wonderful problem that we're trying to wrestle with. An ageing population, growing in number, increasing quality and quantity of life. It's a lovely problem for politicians to have to deal with rather than trying to deal with premature death. So it's a good news story for the NHS. It has to be done cross-party. I pumped in an additional £600 million in the local government settlement this year just gone to support adult social care. A sticking plaster, a help, but not the solution. We did try cross-party with Jeremy Corbyn, remember him, and his answer was, it's not my job to help the Tories out of a hole. I think Keir is a different kettle of fish, and I actually hold out some prospects. I talked to Jim McMahon, my shadow, quite a lot about these issues. It's not going to go away. We are going to have to be blue sky in our thinking, because the key thing is to ensure that there is certainty and that there is dignity. And if we get those 2 things right, we've sorted the problem.
Brilliant. Thank you. Did you want to reply at all, or you were...
Thank you. Let's just hope we can get some cross-party agreement going, because I think this is just something you are all going to kick into the long grass.
We're going to move on now, so I'm going to invite Hugo Mieville to come and ask a foreign policy question.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm not that tall, it has to be said. Thank you, that Chris. Most of you will know on that panel in front of me that I'm an ardent pro-European, and I was in 2016 absolutely appalled that this country voted to leave the EU. I so far have failed to see any good outcomes of what happened in 2016. The economy has lost 4% of GDP. We've lost hundreds of thousands of jobs. Trade is much more difficult with our very close neighbours in Europe. And we've lost a lot of our reputation abroad. Now, I want to give all of you candidates on that stage in front of me the chance to say what you think whether Brexit is a great thing, fantastic success, you can convince me if you want to and try to, or a miserable failure, or is it somewhere between the two? And having answered that question, perhaps you'd like to answer the follow-up question, which is, would you, in the future, want to try and get Britain back into the EU? Thank you.
What a great question, Hugo.
Thank you.
Brexit is a tragedy. It has been... My own reasons for wanting to remain, for what they're worth, were more for what it said about us as a community of nations, and whether we could hang together at a time when we were experiencing some threats from outside. Well, who knew what was going to happen only a few short years later? So short-sighted. Strategy is, well, what do they say? You may not be interested in strategy, but strategy is interested in you. And Brexit has been a tragedy. So, for me, there's no quick route back to a sort of deep arrangement that we had with the EU. We need to close the gap steadily. There's a 4-point plan that the Liberal Democrats have put out to start to close the gap, to narrow the damage, and eventually to rejoin the single market at a time in the future when the conditions are right.
Well, thanks for the question, and it seems to me that if you look at the record of the Conservative government since 2010, it's hard to point, in my opinion, it's hard to point to any real achievements. The exception to that, of course, is Brexit. They did deliver Brexit, but in my view, the version of Brexit that Boris Johnson negotiated, I don't even think it deserves the word negotiated, frankly, has not been good for this country. But I'm afraid, and I campaigned ardently for Remain, but I'm afraid for the time being the question is closed. There cannot be a return in the short term to British membership of the EU or the single market or the customs union. But the approach has to be to get closer relationship with our closest European neighbours and allies, and that's why I welcome the steps that Rachel Reeves set out just this morning in the newspapers on that issue.
Well, Hugo, my old friend, you and I both campaigned to Remain, but it seems that you and Gary have lost the second word of your party's title, which is Democrat. The country voted to leave. This constituency voted to leave, and as a representative, I honoured that decision as much as I had hoped for a different outcome. And I just make that point very gently. I don't recognise the painting of your picture of hundreds of thousands of jobs lost. That is not the case. I would also gently remind you and Gary that it was the Liberal Democrats that was the first party in Westminster that suggested in a policy document that there should be a referendum on our continued membership of the European Union. It didn't come from the Conservative Party. I'd also say I think it's pretty disgraceful that neither Reform nor UKIP can be here to argue their case before you, ladies and gentlemen, this evening. We've had all sorts of issues. I think our reputation in Europe is now much enhanced due to our collaborative work in that sad situation of Ukraine, and I think it is getting better. The point I would say is with the pandemic and everything else, I think Brexit I would best describe as work in progress.
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, Brexit was a great lesson in how to shoot yourself in the foot, wasn't it? What can I say to Simon? The referendum was fought on a whole load of lies. People were completely misled. It was just a shocking... Anyway, Green Party, where are we going to go from the future? Well, the thing is we've got to get closer ties with Europe. They are our nearest market. They've been a fantastic market for us. We need to get closer ties with them again. And when the time is right, the Green Party would like to see us rejoin some kind of a union with the EU.
And from my opinion, I would be led by you in relation to the prospective outcomes as to if there was any decision in referendum or any future decision on rejoining or not on that side of things.
Can I just follow up very quickly? I just feel that Brexit has become the word that dares not speak its name at the moment, the Conservatives and Labour particularly. And I think that's a great shame. You're the two biggest parties in the country. You refuse to discuss this issue, which is absolutely germane to our future, and I think that's a shame. But it's going to be grasped at some time, and let's hope it's going to be soon rather than later. Thank you.
So we've got several questions. We're going to move on to communities and local government. So Barry Cooper. Is Barry in the room? I've seen him somewhere. Barry, do you want to come and ask your question about communities and local government? The latch is on the inside.
What concerns me as a local person looking around the town, it's the empty shops, and some have been empty for years. I just wanted to ask all the candidates what they would do to make our town centres more vibrant and growth and alive again to help the community and help business.
Ken, do you want to go first?
Wow, that's a tricky one. Okay, so Leah, lots of empty properties. It's sad, isn't it? You see a bit of a ghost town. Dorchester seem to be heading that way. Parts of Dorchester looking horribly empty. What I'd like to see is some of those properties turned into accommodation so that you bring life back to the centre of a city or a town at night instead of them just dying, basically. When it comes to getting shops to open up again, interesting question. I think you need to make sure that we don't get these fly-by-night people coming in, just using a shop. There's a whole thing going on about barber shops at the moment, which is a bit weird. I don't quite understand it, but there's some kind of a scam going on there with some of them, apparently. So I think we need to make sure that what we provide is a service to people so that they can buy what they want to buy in a town. And we don't have too many shops that are just all doing much the same. I see a bit too much of that. I like to see a lot of independent traders, for example. And I think you, as I say, you need to bring life back into a town, and that involves having more people living in the middle of the town, from what I can see. There are so many empty properties now, and we've got a shortage of housing, so that's one of the things I would like to see anyway.
We've done some strategic things, Barry, as you know, things like the Towns Fund and others, but retail patterns are changing. Online has changed that, and I think that genie is out of the bottle. I've been doing a lot of work over the last several years with Gillingham Chamber of Commerce and with those in Sturminster. Now, if you look at Sturminster Newton, very strong, vibrant, individual, independent shops, not trying to compete in the mass market, but doing something differently. And Stur is, I think, a very good example to take a look at. I agree with Ken. We have a housing shortage. Let's bring people back into the towns. Let's make sure that there's a good mix of affordable housing as well in these sustainable locations. Let's not have empty units which are never going to find a retail or commercial use again. Let's bring them back, often back into residential use, which is what they would have started in the first place. You then get vibrancy, and particularly on the leisure side and the dwell time of any of our market towns, which is a good thing.
Well, if I become your MP, the first priority for me would be to get the basics right. And that means doing things like never taking a second job, opening a constituency office, and critically, being visible, accessible, and responsive to residents. And I think that on the issue of high streets, there's a very important role that an MP can play in convening the different stakeholders who have a view on what we want from our high streets. The Chambers of Commerce have been mentioned, businesses themselves, local authority, all have a role. So that would be one thing that I would be only too happy to do if I become your MP, to have a big conversation about what we really want from our high streets in the 21st century.
Yeah, sorry, I haven't stood up for a little while. Just in relation to it, can I have a bit of a show of hands as to who's actually set up a business and run a business, or currently in, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, the only reason that I ask that is because obviously you'll probably have more of an understanding of how difficult it is to set up a business and get it running, and all the costs and expenses and all the legal, paperwork that actually needs to be put in place. What we need to do is almost simplify the system incredibly to an nth degree, where it's more beneficial to the prospective shop owners, it's beneficial to the communities, it's beneficial to so many other aspects of the community. Shops have been decimated because of online retail, but that doesn't necessarily mean that subsidies can help. Subsidies can help others create opportunities, jobs, and bring back life to the high streets.
Thanks, Barry, for the question. At a really hard practical level, reform of business rates is a way to achieve this. Business rates that vary dramatically. People are currently penalised for making investments in the property. We propose that we would reform business rates, removing it and replacing it with a landowner's levy, which would spread the costs. Ultimately, the costs would end up back with as running through individual businesses, but that they would be spread out over the portfolio of the landowner rather than with individual shops or businesses taking outsized business rate hits. So that's one practical level. Apart from that, in the high street, I think there's something in high streets deciding amongst themselves and sort of clustering into what's the theme of a particular place and what kind of market do they service. And I've noted in some of our towns, people are focusing on well-being and health and combining retail, particularly with services. And I think that may be a way forward as well. But at a practical level, business rates.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are fast running out of time. We had intended to finish at 9:30. It's now gone 9:30, as you may notice. I'm going to invite the candidates to make a final minute of closing remarks. So Ken, shall we start with you? 1 minute of closing remarks.
Oh dear, what can you do? So, Green Party, what we're looking for is for a fairer society. Okay, there's one thing that runs through the Green Party manifesto, it's the word fairness. And that's what we need desperately, because we've had decades now where the wealth in this country has gone upwards and not been shared equally. Okay, so that's the one thing I would take away from this. Fairness is what we want. We want a community of people. We want a country which treats everybody as having the same needs and they should have the same resources to achieve those needs. Okay, so you want to take one thing away from this, it's the word fairness. Thank you.
Yeah, obviously on that point of note, yeah, I agree in fairness. I believe everything should be fair moving forwards. In relation to, obviously, with the discussion tonight and everything along those lines, you've heard a lot about policies. You've heard a lot about the larger parties. You've heard a lot about what individuals are bringing to the table by way of money and finances and percentages and things along those lines. But, you know, from my side of things, that's, again, the tyranny of majority. You know, they're the individuals that are there telling us, you know, as to what we should be doing and how we should be doing it, and the policies are leading that side of things. And I don't believe that the fairness is in that side of things. And that's why, from my side of things, I want to be the voice for you guys and girls, and, you know, in Westminster to obviously make the changes that we want.
Firstly, thank you to you for your questions and for putting us on the spot and coming up with an array of points that were tough to answer on the spot, but you've put us through the exercise, and I'm certainly grateful for it. There's a clear choice. What you heard from the Conservative view is pointing to a tricky record of action and inaction, and a prospectus from Labour that's looking to, there's a very strongly national picture to what you've heard. I hope that what you've heard from me is a more local and relevant set of answers of hard policy translated into what might happen here for us as a community. And if elected, that's where my commitment is to you and to the community and improving our lives.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming out this evening. It's been a real pleasure to try to answer your questions. And we've covered an awful lot this evening, but it seems to me that what I've heard from people, whether the issue has been the state of our prisons or the recruitment and retention crisis in teaching or the climate and nature crises that we're facing, it seems to me that people in this community can't bear the thought of 5 more minutes of the Conservatives, let alone another 5 years. And it's true that I have spoken in the main about the national policy platform of the Labour Party, but 4 out of the 5 of us are here as party representatives, and we have 1 independent candidate. And so I think, I'm very proud of Labour's manifesto, but if we do get a Labour government, the Labour government will not solely be governed by the contents of the manifesto. We will be governed by the mandate we're given to deliver real change. So every vote for Labour in North Dorset at this election makes the real change that people have said on issue after issue after issue. People are absolutely desperate to see.
Can I stop you there, please? Sorry. I'm going to be hard on that one.
All politics is local. And your MP has to be a local politician. And I hope the flavour of the answers I've given to your questions this evening, ladies and gentlemen, underscore that I am still that tried and tested, proven voice that you can rely upon to understand the issues of our communities and to represent them across Westminster and Whitehall. Because it's not just parroting the party line, it's understanding and taking those views back to Westminster, and that is what I've done over these last 9 years. This is an important election. A lot rests on it, as we all know. Every election is the same. But this one is particularly important because economic indicators are thankfully pointing at last in the right direction, and that harvest of fruits is within touching distance. Let's work together. Let's stick together and let us finish what it is that we have started. Give me the honour and your vote on the 4th of July, it would be a pleasure and a privilege to continue to serve you all. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your questions. Thank you very much to the candidates for answering. Can we give them a round of applause? They have weathered the storm well. Hopefully they will be able to sleep well tonight. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming. I hope you've appreciated being given this opportunity to ask the questions that need to be asked. Have a great evening. Please do vote on the 4th of July and see you anon. Bless you. Take care.
I'm always enjoying it.